Okay. I think people are trickling in. So we'll give it just 10 or so more seconds. It's this little trickle of the participants. Um, Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. It is Thursday. Today I'm really looking forward to, chatting about all things value-based care alongside Pranam and Regina today. I am your host. I write hospitology. And today we'll just have an hour-long conversation around value-based care, and specifically around, health systems, hospitals, how Adventist has really, leveraged the garage and, data and infrastructure to supercharge their value-based care strategy. So with that being said, we're 6 minutes past. So Regina, Pranam, Regina, starting with you, how about you give a quick intro?
Okay, thank you, Blake. Uh, First of all, let me apologize. I'm coming off of a pretty horrible seasonal something, and I have a weak voice and a little coughing. So, in case that occurs, please forgive. I'm very, very happy to be here with you all today. My work title is Value-Based Care Executive, and that's a large umbrella that I hope we'll be talking about on many levels today. But at Adventist, we have multiple at-risk lines of business, which include things like ACOs and capitated models and global and individual and, you name it, we have it. So we have alphabet soup when it comes to value-based care. And I think what you'll hear is the organizing principles that really help to make that work regardless of the type of model you are trying to execute. So thank you, Pranam, who has been a fabulous partner in this space.
Pranam, go ahead as well.
Thank you, Blake. Thank you for having me and Regina on this. Regina, it's an absolute pleasure to be partnered with you, to be on this session with you. Pranam Ben, founder and CEO of The Garage, been in healthcare for 2 decades, been in software for 25 years plus. And The Garage was founded in April 2012. So for the last 13 years, we've been absolutely committed to empowering the transformation to value-based care using digital technologies with the data-first approach. So very excited to be here, Blake. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Looking forward to learning from both of you. And let's go ahead and just jump right into the deep end. Regina, maybe starting from the top down. Can you give me just a broad view of value-based care as you see it today? Where is value-based care today within hospitals and health systems?
So I probably should set the stage by saying Adventist is a 28 hospital and growing system with about 450 clinics across 3 states, California, Oregon, and Hawaii. So it's a very large enterprise that we're trying to unify. Okay, so I think unification is one of the first principles under value-based care. I grew up testing models in value-based care, starting with the first CMS demonstration project in when I was at Hackensack in New York with CMS. We partnered with Premier, CMS, and IHI, and literally changed the trajectory of the country because they found out that quality does pay. So that was the first big learning. From there, multiple models have, of course, emerged. I was in the early days of joint ventures with MA Land and actually worked for a startup company that supported HCC coding after the government first developed that. So there's a lot of deep information management that goes along with this. I see a poll question. Shall we take a moment to answer that?
Yeah, and sorry, Regina, just real quick for everyone in the audience, we'll be doing polls, interactive polls kind of throughout the session. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll be kind of moderating those at the end of the session as well. So Regina, you can keep talking, but we'll have kind of ongoing polls, if that makes sense.
Okay. So anyway, the roots are long and deep, and many people entered this space under different names and different terminology. I think that's where the alphabet soup comes in. And I think that's why it's confusing for so many people, because they may know one model or the other, but not necessarily holistically what it all looks like. But at its core, you're talking about the value proposition, which is the combination of cost and quality and engagement. And when I say engagement, I mean patient, provider, and workforce. So I know we have moved from the triple aim to the quadruple aim to the quintuple aim. The truth is, engagement is all parties, and if they don't work together, you won't get the outcomes that you need. So at its core, I would say a triple aim approach to making sure we keep in balance the care we provide and empower patients and providers to be able to do the jobs they need to do. And when it's done right, the outcomes are miraculous. So I will say that after 20 or 30 years in this space. So Pranam, maybe you want to add something there.
No, I think I mean, you said it right, Regina. I think there's different organizations at different stages of evolution into value-based care, Blake. We've seen more advanced organizations that have been at it for many years and eventually crack the code. And then we've seen organizations that are dipping their toes and trying to figure out how do they transform their core business models into a value-based reimbursement reality, right? And our ability to create a normalized experience, our ability to identify best practices across the spectrum has been our, kind of like our compass or North Star, if you will. And but overall, especially post-pandemic, we are seeing more commitment, more acceleration towards value-based care models. And you see that in the stats as well. Today, when we say 60% of overall commercial contracting has a value-based modifier, that is a good sign, right? So that's basically where I want to focus on. It has taken us a decade to get to this point where we can eventually take off and BBC becomes the mainstream experience for all healthcare stakeholders.
100%. Yeah, great thoughts. And maybe Pranam, to both of you, you guys both have ongoing conversations with stakeholders in this space. As you're having those conversations, what's top of mind for folks in value-based care today?
I'll take a stab there. I'll tell you that in addition to the data management component being unified and a unifying principle, it is so for the providers as well. Many of them have moved from solo or small practices to larger groups because they see the value of collaboration and the value of needing to organize patients and populations beyond the one episode of care at a time. So this unification theme goes across all components of this, whether it's data integrity, care coordination, or direct provider-patient relationship.
And in the stakeholders that we typically tend to engage with, Blake, including stakeholders like Regina, I would say culture and governance is top of mind because VVC is a fundamental shift in the way you looked at how you go to market, how you service your patients. Data interoperability is absolutely top of mind. I think everybody are beginning to realize that in a fee-for-value model, data is king. So being data first is primal to success in these models. And last but not the least, I think the evolution of best practices from a workflow standpoint to drive all lines of care management and understand the opportunities that come about in financial analytics and things like that. Those three are the main components that are top of mind for most stakeholders today. And of course, the workforce component is an ongoing undercurrent as well. I think we see different organizations being challenged by it in different ways. And that's where I see a great opportunity to leverage technology and data to basically normalize that challenge that we have.
Yeah, great thoughts. And for the audience, between these two, lots of expertise in value-based care. And so you can see the poll question. Some of you are in the early stage, but most of you are kind of in the midway to advanced stage of your kind of value-based care strategies. So if you guys have any more nuanced questions or anything like that as we go along, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll kind of interread those in. So yeah, okay. So moving on, Regina, back to you. Maybe we can talk more kind of regulatory and like policy market shifts lately. So obviously the team mandatory bundle is a thing, right? But along with that, there's been a lot of headwinds in Medicare Advantage, kind of policy uncertainty around the new administration. So how are you navigating all of these kind of tumultuous waters today?
The more things change, the more they remain the same. Having been involved in the early days of design, many of the principles really haven't changed. It's the execution of those principles that keep changing depending on what either the political or regulatory environment is. And let's not forget the payviders. Okay, so The payers, in many cases, have a provider arm now, whether it's practice groups or care coordination arms. And I think that has created some complexity because sometimes the patients don't know which way to turn, right? So I think it's incumbent on all of us to make sure in our partnerships and in our contracting, we have clarity around that and organize around that because, the last thing a patient wants is a call from someone they don't know or don't expect to hear from. So you can have a case manager and an insurance plan calling or someone who's on your care team, right? And I think that's where value-based care does have more guardrails to help protect with that. And the line of sight in the old days, the payers had all of the claims information and thought they understood the total picture. But absent the clinical content, you don't have the whole picture. And so the integration that we're talking about here, where you have the integrated clinical and claims-based data, really gives you a much more holistic, view. You can have a different conversation, and it really does change the course of how you interact with a patient. So I just think that's very, very important. And let me pause there. I'm not sure if I directly answered your question.
No, yeah, that's a great overview. Maybe kind of more tactically around, the team model specifically. Have you had conversations around that, or how are you
So the
navigating that?
Teams model. So again, I was involved in the early demonstration projects with bundle payment at one organization. We did 9 of them and were actually very, very successful. One of the very common themes, whether it's the Teams model or an ACO model or a CAP model, is for the point of service provider. How do I know who this patient is? How do I know what plan they're in? How do I know? Because we have taught we have taught all providers that you treat everyone the same way all the time, no matter what, regardless of payer, etc. However, we have contractual obligations and the payers make benefit choices that they're paying for that we also have to honor. So I think one of the things we have to do is demystify this everything for everyone everywhere. That's more of an HMO model that is not necessarily very efficient. It has one of the highest expense trends right now.
Mm.
So we need to be more precise. And I think the most attractive thing for me about the garage was the ability for them to be agile and the ability for them to be precise across these multiple lines of business where the point of service needs what they need in order to carry out the care that is required when the patient is in front of them or if they're doing telephonic outreach.
That makes a ton of sense. That's a great, answer, and I think that leads in perfectly to our next, topical discussion. And you mentioned interoperability and the need for kind of data and infrastructure. So Pranam, like with that, we're seeing the shift from point solution hell into holistic and platform based infrastructure and approaches. One, do you agree with that? And then two, how does the health system think about picking the right platform for their needs in value based care? And we'd love to turn it over to you to kind of discuss how your platform works, your airport framework, those sorts of things. Would love to hear it all.
Yeah, I think the at least our posture on this, Blake, and this is something that we kind of uh, discuss with our partners like Adventist is you want to have the platform as a command center that centralizes the data, normalizes and standardizes the workflows and things like that. But at the end of the day, that intent is to drive more impact and more intelligence at the point of care, right? Because you're not going to create a cohesive, centralized, care experience. But what you want to do is to let that be the backbone of a decentralized, intelligent, information at your fingertips, tools at your fingertips, action at your fingertips experience, so patients can get a better experience, a more affordable experience wherever they are, right? So that's basically the overall premise of how I see us working with our partners, customers to make that a reality at scale. So that's the general premise. And if you look at the airport model, which is something that's been a guide for us for more than 8 years now, it its birth was because of this need to understand, hey, how do we bring all of this together, right? And we said, okay, let's think about, we've seen the airport function as a hub to allow for, travelers to go from point A to point B. And if we think of every community, every healthcare organization, and an organization like Adventist as an airport, what are the different terminals, what are the different concourses, and what are the different gates that come together so their patient, the traveler, goes from point A to point B in the right time, in the right way, for the right reason. So that became the guide to create that platform experience. And then now we're looking at, okay, how can we then, you know, get data to be more actionable where it matters, which is at every point of care, regardless of where care happens.
Yeah, and you have a great graphic of the airport model. Let me see if I can load it up here. Or I'll pull it over real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so for those online, I did through hospitality. I wrote about the garage and their kind of framework, and so you can view it there or on their website. It's very very interesting and a great framework. And Regina, I would love to hear how Adventist has leveraged kind of that airport model, or any other frameworks that you find to be successful at your organization. Would love for you to kind of dive into how you think about that.
Well, I'll start by saying the California Hospital Association hosted a population health management certification program a while back. And Kaufman Hall did a piece on IT. And what they said at the time, and this is pre-COVID, was that a legacy EHR system will never meet the needs and the agility outputs of a value-based care or population health management system. And at the time, I had started 7 ACOs, and I was in full agreement with that. But no one on the executive side really understood that, including our IT counterparts. And so there is this tendency to think that one EHR is going to handle it all. And what tends to happen is, because value-based care is a subset of your total population when you think about hospitalizations and other things, it usually gets prioritized fairly low within your organization. And so you're desperate to have performance outcomes, but it's very hard to queue up to a high priority area when you need that agility. The regs change, the contracts change, you have a new population, a new geography. So that agility, that ability to move quickly, and this is where we have had the experience of we can turn on a dime, whether it's a narrow network or a broad network, whether it's, we map it. There's a fundamental model, but it allows that rapid exchange and rapid change model, like a plane changing the gates at the airport. And it does have to be that quick, okay? And the legacy systems can't do it. And of course, the internal IT folks, and I say this with love, not disparaging, but they have so many requests on their plate, many directly clinically related, that their focus is where it is, but it's not in this space.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And looking at the answers to the poll question, it looks like the majority of folks, the biggest factor influencing their approach to selecting a platform or is actual insights and real-time data usability. So kind of within that, Regina, and more broadly, and Pranam, would love your response as well. What are the key pieces of infrastructure that you need for a successful value-based care program? And maybe what are some common pitfalls that people fall into in selecting those partners, or building internally, whatever it looks like?
So more is not better, I would say, as a first premise. I have now started about 20 different ACOs and additional probably 20 or so cap models, et cetera, et cetera. And more is not better. You don't need a large workforce. You need tools that inform you in real time so you can take action that's meaningful and work with patients in a manner that helps them self-motivate, self-activate, and understand what it is they can do to contribute to their own health. So I think, you just, I talk to other organizations. I listen to organizations who hire, 20 or 30 care navigators or case managers, and it's completely unnecessary. What you want to do is build on what works in your clinical space, and then give them the visibility they need at the point of service in order to execute efficiently. And the resource consumption is quite small. We have always been rather lean. And again, it's an incredibly large organization, but we can function that way because of the tools that are available to use.
Just to piggyback on the Blake, I think being community facing with a outside in approach, which is fundamentally different to how fee for service models play out, which is more inside out and being reactive. I think that's key to understand that you're coming at this very differently, right? And then having that infrastructure that supports that mindset, that supports that business transformation shift, and having the data that can guide you to the opportunities, understanding the entire population, understanding the articulated and unarticulated needs of your population is going to be extremely important. And having that culture and governance, which is something that we champion with all the customers that we partner with, is at the end of the day, healthcare is human centric, right? I mean, you can build the best state of the art technology, but if it doesn't speak and if it doesn't protect the sanctity of that relationship between the patient and the provider, it is not going to effective. It is not going to be effective, right? So those are the things that we see as opportunities and challenges as organizations transform to value-based care at scale. Even organizations like Adventist, and Regina spoke to that, split focus between what do you do on a day-to-day basis versus investing in the strategies that will be the reality of tomorrow, right? That is going to be a constant challenge for all of us, all the stakeholders in the ecosystem. And the one way to commit it is to commit it collectively, rewire the core fabric of the entire ecosystem, and ensure that we don't erode the patient's experience. I mean, that's a point of no return, right? So that's something we're very cognizant, and that's a responsibility that we all have.
If I could add one more thought, the worst thing or the largest complaint you hear from a patient is that the healthcare providers, collectively, all of us, ask the same question like 10 or 15 different times. What's your medication? Do you have allergies, et cetera? And it's just a real annoyance. It's an incredible annoyance. So to have information that's unified, and what we find, particularly in the medication reconciliation space, is that patients have multiple prescribers. And so even if they're part of your primary care system, it doesn't mean they're not going down the street to a specialist who's giving them samples that they need on a rare or highly cost drug. And so it's very interesting because in this discovery of the integration that we have been able to show providers, what they don't see in their legacy system on a regular basis. Okay. And whether that's a lab value that was done somewhere else or was a medication that was prescribed somewhere else. So we go back to that theme of unification. There really hasn't been a place where you see it all in real time. And one other big important call out is kudos to CMS, which I know people have always complained about. But the truth is they're sending weekly data now for the MSSP population or whatever other population you're working with. It's weekly ingestion of real-time information in a very organized and ingestible manner, and it's very usable. So CMS has set the stage and the bar for getting things done right, and we need to rise to that occasion. It's no longer wait till next quarter when we get a report. We have real-time information where we can help people, and it matters. We did a study where we looked at patients we've had year over year in these models, whether it's regardless of the model. But what we found is the continuity within a value-based care model year over year absolutely bends the health curve and the cost curve. Now, you don't see that in the literature because in these models, you reconcile annually. And so think about it. You get your population in the first quarter, you intervene second and third quarter, fourth quarter, everyone's catching up with their deductibles and they start spending money, right? There's a pattern to all of this that becomes very predictable. So what I would love to look at is some longitudinal studies because as a patient gets involved in a true care coordination model, then you start to see that curve. You need 3 to 5 year contracts that really help you achieve what the government is looking for, which is that health benefit and cost benefit. And it's there You just have to look at it differently. And to date, no one's really done that.
And Blake, from our perspective as a partner and stakeholder to what Regina's and Adventist mission is, we've taken on ourselves to go scrape the universe to get all the data that's possible. In fact, we have this saying that if the patient's data is stored in the dishwasher, we'll go get it. We are that obsessed about getting the data that's actionable for Adventists, right? And then so in many ways, if you look at it, for the last 2 decades, we as a ecosystem struggled with data availability, right? I think thanks to many initiatives from CMS and other agencies and aggregators like Health Gorilla, we've been able to solve for that in a very acceptable way. So now the opportunity and the focus is how do you go from availability at scale to interoperability at scale, which is what Regina is speaking to. Like, how do you apply the data and make it available in context in a way that's actionable, in a way that represents the version of truth, so the patients can benefit from it without having to carry the burden of care on themselves,
Or Pranam without the patient suspecting that you don't really know them. I mean, when you have disparate information, they feel that you really don't know them, right? So it's a much more holistic component. And again, just the real-time ability and the ability to filter as you need to instead of queuing up a report. You have to have that independence in the use of the information as well.
Yeah, I love those thoughts. And, Regina, to your point around this kind of increasing level of real-time data, that's becoming table stakes for value-based care organizations, to be able to leverage that. And the organizations like the Garage can go hand in hand with that kind of mission. Pranam, just a side note on the dishwasher thing. I currently have like 6 men under my house replacing my sewage pipes. So I imagine you'd be down there too collecting the data, right?
Whatever it takes, Blake, whatever it takes.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Gosh. Being a homeowner, right? Anyway, moving on, let's talk about everybody's favorite subject today, artificial intelligence. And Pranam, you have an interesting, viewpoint on artificial intelligence. Let me put up the poll question real quick. You think about it more as applied intelligence. So can you kind of dive into the distinction there and how your organization, applies applied intelligence to your Bridge platform and, supports daily functions?
I think this has been our focus from day one, Blake. I think whether it's AI, whether it is automation, whether it is any other form of technology that we look at, we look at it as a means to an end, not an end in itself, right? So we start with that end in mind, right? What gets measured, right? If you think about the outcomes, the fundamentals of VBC, cost of care, access to care, utilization, patient satisfaction, equity, whatever be the different outcomes that we are tracking in our quintuple aim, if you will, we begin there and say, how do we leverage something like AI so it can be measured where it matters? So that's where the applied comes in. Where does it get applied, and how does that change the reality to a positive outcome? So that's what gets applied is what matters, is basically how we come at this. And that's why for us the A in AI is applied, right? And if you look at the building blocks of an AI stack, I think AI from that perspective is the greatest force of technology that we have to potentially apply to change the status quo in healthcare. I mean, that is real, right? So a lot of the work that you'll see us do from a Garage point of view is to create that stack and apply it in a way that drives our collective journey towards that North Star, towards that quintuple aim, towards that, democratization of value-based care that every patient deserves. And we have a framework for it. We have a posture on it. We have my team and we've identified an entire suite of AI-based technologies that we are very actively applying. But it is not being applied for AI's sake. We are basically beginning with that end in mind and driving that, using AI as our driving force, if you will, to get us there faster and better in a more scalable way.
And
Yeah.
I think the trust factor is growing. Your name just changed to Blaze, by the way. Like,
Yeah, I did that on purpose. I'm leading into something else.
Bit of an inside joke, but the I think the trust factor is growing because we do spend a lot of time doing data validation, right? Because everyone worries about many of the questions. I noticed in the poll that it's a third split. People have very
Let me share this.
experience or use. So it's very interesting to me that that's where we are. But as we've been testing AI, not only here in this with this product, but with others, the level of the integrity of the information has grown significantly, where the clinicians are now comfortable using it. But you do have to go through your data validation processes. And
makes sense.
it's interesting because the first response always is the data's wrong. And then when you take the time, and you really do need to take the time to take a sample and look at it, actually it's not. And it's a great learning experience for the team members to go through that and recognize there were sources of information they hadn't seen previously, such as the out-of-network usage, where we just had no idea about other care being rendered. So I would say don't doubt it, validate, and now we're to the trust and validate. It's validate first, but now we're trust and validate. But I do think there's a shift going on. And I do think it helps with the concept of empowering the patient as the CEO of their own information. It also empowers the patient, and it helps them to be held accountable to their goals of care and what they can contribute to their overall health and wellness.
And Regina, you talk about empowerment of the patient. It seems like there's a lot of kind of more elements of consumerism happening with the dawn of AI. I'm curious, are there any other kind of more, specific real world examples that you guys have implemented or are excited about currently where, it directly impacts, your clinical workflows or patient care or, bends the cost curve, so forth? I'm really curious for your opinion on that.
I think
That's the big question. Go ahead, Pranam.
Oh, go ahead.
I'll give a couple of examples from our perspective, Blaze, and I'm sure Regina will have many to share. Um, the common denominator in everything that we are doing is the opportunity to scale the right things in healthcare, right? I mean, if you look at AI as well, in the examples that we have enabled our agentic front end, if you will, you're seeing care teams outreach to 3 times the number of patients that they could in a traditional environment, right? So our ability to scale that outreach, our ability to increase response times by 43 to 50%, our ability to use data to help organizations find additional bonus payments because of previously a lack of data, and our ability to bring in or automate more than 200,000 quality data points using a digital front end. I mean, there are so many examples. Our world, this is our reality, right? This is what we are anchored on. We've never been influenced by how great the tech is or how cool we think we are. We've always been grounded on the realities of the impact that we have had and use that to guide the next few steps that we take, right? So we have many examples, and each one kind of like influencing our thought process. But that's what we are absolutely grounded on, the realities of the impact we have, the realities of the work that we do. But the most common denominator in all the work, in all the impact, in all the storylines that we have enabled is this ability to scale to levels that are previously unknown using today's data and technologies, including AI.
Just this morning, I got a note from one of our leaders that talked about the grid, which is the care management tool within the garage. And they said that this tool is going to help with efficiency, with care coordination management, with helping the affiliate providers who are not on our EHR, by the way. We have many of those who are not on a similar EHR, so this provides visibility to them. But they basically said that this tool for the care navigators to use and assist affiliate physicians with managing chronic care conditions and transitions of care will make a world of difference. So these are people who have been using tools. We've tried EHR-based tools and other tools over the years, and the piece that was required was very detailed chart review before patient outreach, and this helps to preclude a lot of that time and resource consumption because what you need is in front of you in real time. And again, once you trust and verify, then you can move forward with a lot of agility.
Yeah, I love that. That's great, and really excited to hear about the care navigation. It seems like that's a huge space with a lot of need. So awesome that the garage is building for that, and that you guys are finding that very valuable.
So
If it,
that app that Regina reference plays is that's been our last 5 year focus to kind of like create that care, the most comprehensive care management console that today is driving 70% of the overall platform adoption across the country. And the statement that Regina shared with all of us is speaks to that commitment and the work that we have done to enable that comprehensive console, if you will. So regardless of the need, regardless of the realm of care management, your ability to come to a common place, have the data, have the tools, and act on it on time, because that will be the most effective way to calibrate the demand so you can then normalize the supply. Because there's not enough care managers in the country. Just think about it. That equation just doesn't mathematically balance. If you look at the number of physicians, the number of patients, and the number of care managers, that is not an equation you can explain to any mathematician in this country. So the only way for us to come at it is to be more proactive than keep reacting to patients that show up at inpatient facilities and emergency rooms.
And the providers are taking that workforce.
That is correct.
So we have to really be efficient because it is a shrinking workforce and they have much deeper pockets than we do. And so there's strong competition in that space. The difference is we have the outcomes. I think that's a very, very important note. And there's some science around it. We look at behavioral motivation techniques. People think care navigation is just a transaction or a check-in. It's not. It is not just a discharge, what I call the high-yaw phone call. It's not a high-yaw phone call. There's some science around it, and we look at patient activation. We look at patients' understanding of their chronic conditions. There's depth to it, and we also include patient goals of care, which are very different from the medical goals of care. And we do all that we can to align those two because they are different. But those are spaces that are usually not understood or incorporated into these models.
yeah, fascinating. Those are great insights, and I think we covered that topic really, really well. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We'll get to in a sec. But I've got one more question for you guys before we kind of move into that audience Q&A. Just really more around kind of just the people skills and like kind of the outlook and the sustainability. Maybe starting with you, Regina. How do you foster a culture of innovation and improvement, iteration, and also what advice would you give to other value-based care organizations today, whether they're just starting out or whatever part of the journey they're on?
It may sound counterintuitive, but we always say we're a small but mighty team. Again, it's not the size and scale that you have to be thinking about. It's the information management and the ability to execute in real time to get outcomes. Okay. We have the capability, for example, of seeing an emerging pattern of high utilization and get on it immediately with the patient about why you go into the ED. Yeah, I notice you haven't had a PCP appointment in a year. We're able to course correct very quickly because of the liberation of data. Okay. And absent that, you're really sort of poking in the dark and keeping your fingers crossed that you hit it right. Most groups go after the high utilizer, which is your smallest population, but highest expense component. So it makes sense to do that. But we focus on the rising risk. We focus on those patients with multiple chronic conditions and help them manage their life so that they don't become the next high utilizer.
And Blake, from our perspective, it's very similar to what Regina said. I think it all begins with the why, right? Why do we do what we do? right? Why the garage? Why is the garage relevant? Why do we do? And that kind of is articulated in our overarching mission statement that, hey, it's time to change healthcare for good, right? The why should then guide the how. The how is where you think about, okay, what level of innovation, to what is your approach, what is your value proposition, what are you building in this, in your journey towards empowering that mission. And the why and the how, they kind of like come together in this kind of like this blended view of how you kind of curate a culture that the entire crew live in. So the culture is committed to the mission, and then the crew live in the culture. And with value-based care, when I started the garage, that's when it was on the same day that the first batch of MSSVs were formed in the country on April 2012. And early on, we saw this and we said, okay, this can represent the greatest opportunity to innovate in healthcare. And that's who we want to be, right? So it took us time. We were patient. We have quite a few scars in our back, trying to get this done right and whatnot. We took our time. We didn't want to be, reckless. We didn't want to be too quick. So we took our time. We built a strong fabric, a very strong DNA. And now the name of the game for us is to scale across the corridor. So that's what we are excited about.
And I noticed the poll question, empowering the providers and empowering the patients. So empowerment there is the other thing. You might say unification and empowerment, self-activation.
I love it. That's great. Yeah. All comes back to the people, right? And Pranam, one last kind of, why don't you give yourself a shout out for your Be Bold kind of campaign you're going on right now? What does it mean to be bold? And can you give us an overview of that?
I think the premise of the Be Bold campaign was basically to challenge the status quo, Blaze. That's basically how we came at it. And we said, if you're going to fundamentally alter the variables of a system that's been stagnant for decades, you can't come at it with a run-of-the-mill approach, right? I mean, for you to build bold, you have to be bold. And that's kind of like how we rationalize with it. That campaign became our trigger. And generally, our point of view is that, the next 3 to 5 years are going to be very critical for us as a entire ecosystem to shift that, to see that industrial shift. Otherwise, I fear the system will become too top heavy and unsustainable for the next generation and even the next decade. So we said we'll come at it from this perspective, and we are absolutely humbled by the response, the kind of like alignment that we are seeing in the sector around this campaign, and we are learning from it too. Like, what does it mean to be bold for us, which is building our entire reality around a data first approach, a platform based command center, an agentic front end, and a people and process that weaves itself around this strategy, right? What does it mean to be bold for Adventist? What does it mean to be bold for our other customer, our partners like Health Gorilla and LabCorp and all these consumers that we partner with? So trying to get their sense of what it means to be bold is influencing how we come at being bold as we commit to changing healthcare for good.
I would
Absolutely.
say one other thing is I failed to mention that Adventist Health is 82% government paid. We don't have the deep commercial pockets. We don't have the deep commercial contracts, and we have been successful regardless of that payment model, which most organizations cannot compete with. And it's because we are people first. I think we are bold and very innovative because we know what needs to be done in order to get those foundational elements handled. Okay, so just going back to the AAA and the engagement of the workforce, the provider, and the patients, first and foremost. Okay, and then really keeping your eye on the ball. There's no fluff in these transactions. This is business. This is goal oriented, and having front-facing information is the secret. I looked at a demo recently where someone was showing us, their reporting capabilities, and I was glazed over because all I saw were Excel spreadsheets inside of a computer. There was nothing about the reporting that made them attractive or want me to use them. So I think the other part of this is the look feel so that it's at a glance able to be actionable, not something I have to go sit in a corner and have an analyst figure out ex post facto.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you both for, your insights today across a variety of topics. I think that now it makes sense to move to audience Q&A. We have several great questions. So let me flip my slide real quick. There we go. And if anybody has need to add, we can get in touch after the session. But Regina, this is really an extension of kind of our wrap up. But what's next for Adventist Health as far as your value-based care roadmap, and how does digital innovation continue to shape that path forward?
Well, you know, uh, it- our CEO shared with us that he was a participant in a hospital association, American Hospital Association meeting this week, and they are calling this season, sort of preparing for the winter purge, because of all of the governmental changes going on. Folks are really struggling with what that future looks like and how you prepare. So, real time, actionable information is incredibly important. Having a workforce that can be lean and highly motivated is very important because we don't know what other constraints are going to be in front of us. Um, we have a roadmap with the garage on adding additional product lines. And as you mentioned, the themes, we haven't even talked about the themes mandatory um, bundles, but we have 8 hospitals who will be coming under that mandate. And an information management component is going to be incredibly important. Okay. So as the challenges come forward, we will be partnering and doing what we can to keep those visibilities. Some are easier than others because in some of those situations, you have a standard population and you know who they are and you can build that. In the Teams model, you will have sort of an episodic approach to make a decision about having surgery. So how do you capture those folks and then have them front facing during their episodes of care so you can be efficient and comprehensive. So I think that's some work ahead of us. I can tell you many vendors are in that space and they're already quoting huge dollars per organization. It's just not affordable and it's retro data. So we need to continue to explore and innovate in these new spaces as we continue to go forward. I think what happens is with what we have in front of us now, it liberates time and energy so that you can spend some time on that next big question.
Yeah, fascinating. And Regina, you mentioned the kind of the importance of your frontline staff, your care managers, and so forth. There's a more kind of tactical question from an attendee that basically they're asking, how do you get your staff to continue being engaged amongst patients, not answering their phone calls? Contact center, those sorts of things. Any innovative way to solve for patients answering the phone?
Well, Lori DePalma is on. I saw her show up in the chat, and she is a fabulous care management leader. And she keeps her teams highly motivated. And I think it's because of respecting them and giving them airtime to discuss how they themselves are innovating. So I think you do have to allow the stories to be told and to understand what your success factors are. They work very, very closely with the communities as well as with the patients. And we do have good partner relationships with our payers. And so we pull out all of those interactions in order to get what we need. So if we're not successful, I mean, look, if people work, if you're talking about a working class person with a commercial insurance, calling them between 9 and 5 just doesn't make any sense. Okay. So, and people hate dinner time phone calls. So what do you do? So I think there are texting options. I think the garage has a great patient engagement campaign option that allows you to be precise in your outreach. And it's not annoying because you could do it once and well. So I do think the technology that's available is making that all not only respectful, but efficient.
Hmm. Pranam, moving over to you, what are some early wins organizations can aim for when deploying applied intelligence or predictive analytics to build buy-in?
I think there are a lot of low-hanging fruits, Blake. I mean, in the work that we've done, if you kind of like look at understanding what you know about who you know, right? And then saying, okay, how can I use data to better monitor hospitalizations, for example, right? With the transitional care management aspect of it, that's a big win, quick win for organizations that are transforming to value-based care. And then you kind of start thinking about, okay, what don't I know about who I know? Which is, if you look at social determinants, for example, that is not mainstream today. So our ability to kind of like provision that at the point of care and say, hey, this patient has a high need and is a high cost because they're dealing with an issue with housing or food insecurity or lifestyle or whatever be the case, gives a better perspective, gives a better, more actionability at the point. So I think there are different ways to come at this, but overall systemic utilization by allowing for these care teams to focus on the patients that are in that two quadrants is a quick win, regardless of what type of organization you are. So that's what I've seen play out. And now for us, it's about, like I said, taking that at scale. And to what Regina said earlier as well, how can we give a more comprehensive lens on the patient's data so to empower better decision making, right? And that's what we are working on.
Yeah, makes sense. And I see one question in the chat from Megan. She's talking. She'd love to hear your reactions to the doc fix and the budget bill, which would cause the performance-based payments to be lower starting in 29 and potentially lessen the incentive for providers to participate in alternative payment models. Have you guys seen that or kind of given any thought to that? Any initial reactions?
I think, I'll speak to it from my perspective. I think the overall posture, there's going to be a lot of back and forth on these kind of initiatives. And I don't think there is this reality where there's a consistent understanding of what needs to happen, right? Because even if you look at the policy decisions that have been made in the last 6 months, uh, from where I am, there is this extreme duality of what's playing out, Blake. So there's a segment that's excited for reasons that are aligned with their priorities, and there is this other segment which is extremely concerned about the things that are happening. And I think each side will react to DocFix differently, right? And for us, our posture is, if you focus on the basics, focus on the fundamentals, right? I mean, patients want better access to care in a more affordable way, in a way that allows them to improve their quality of life. And if that's the guiding principle of, DocFix or anything else that comes into play, I think we'll all be okay. But APMs are what is the only way to shift, is the only way to change the reality in healthcare, because we've tried everything else. If you really think about it, we've tried everything else. And if you look at the overall study around 18 APMs that CMS has put out in the last decade, it's a very mixed result, right? There's 1/3 that have been successful, 1/3 that have generated very little to no impact, and 1/3 that have actually hurt the overall system of care, right? But I look at it as a perspective, okay, learn from that and focus more on what works. And there's no other way, there's no other direction to go, right? You're not going to go back to what was reality 2 decades ago, So that's my initial reaction to doctors. I would love to hear what Regina has to say on it.
You're on mute, Regina.
Thank you. I think the doctors get a bad rap in many cases now, excluding those who have been involved in fraud and abuse, which we all want to see stop and go away. But I have worked across the country in large academic centers, smaller organizations, etc. And what I find are groups of engaged physicians who want to get it right. Okay. And they're very diligent about looking at the facts and then managing to the facts. So one of the largest cost factors is drugs. So it's drugs, and then it's the choice of like high cost injectables and drugs that really are not necessarily necessary, but they're being prescribed. And I see a lot of diligence among peers in order to get that right. So when we talk about the cost of healthcare, there's clinical, there's operational, and there's financial components to that. We tend to always talk about the doctor, but we forget about the rest of it, the impact of the pharmaceuticals on all of this, which is enormous. These data that we get, we study very, very closely. A SNF, post-acute skilled nursing home visit is far more expensive than a hospitalization. So we have to start to really understand the cost drivers and what needs to be fixed instead of making these global pronouncements that are very dramatic, but sometimes ill-conceived. That is truly how I feel, and I have been doing this for a long time. I know data inside and out, and I can tell you, when I worked with Kaiser for the first time in the history of the company, we had a zero expense trend because I could tell you to the penny where the money was going. So I think before we make broad pronouncements, we need to examine closely the data and information and make sure we know which problem we're trying to solve. Okay. And I can tell you with good confidence that it's not all the doctors.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. Lots of people across the industry trying to make it better, bend the cost curve, all sorts of things. So thank you, Regina and Pranam, for those comments, and thank you so much today for your time. I learned a ton. I hope the audience found it super valuable. Thank you so much to the Garage for sponsoring today's virtual events. They're doing a lot of great work. They gave me a new name, Blaze Madden, so I have that to take back with me as well. But yeah, so thanks everyone for being a part of this, and I'm gonna wrap it up there.
This sounds much cooler, Blake.
I agree. Yeah,
You may want to talk to your parents about it.
or maybe like my
Please.
a second born son, something like that. We'll make something work. But all right, hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you so much.